part of our series, the Crypto Investing 101 Fundamentals and Concepts. Today in our series, we are going to be talking about money flow, understanding money flow. And so we have 3 different topics to go over as far as money flow goes, really covering modern what I would consider money flow, and what kind of governs that, what controls it, what process are we currently using, and the process we're currently using. We're not going to cover maybe I'll find something for in the midterm. Quantitative easing, QE2 is what we're covering today. And yeah, so we got a few different people talking about it in different ways. We'll hear the pluses and potential downsides of quantitative easing, what that means for markets, and then we'll discuss what we've learned about that. Another topic that we have is the Weimar Republic. For anybody who is familiar with that or is not familiar with that, just a refresher there. And I think that bodes well with quantitative easing, just for understanding what it's trying to not let have happen, basically, and what could happen in certain situations, and what does that mean? What are plays that you can make if something like that were to happen? But that's not going to happen in QE, but it's letting you know what they're trying to fix. And then we're going to hear Elizabeth Warren speaking in a video where she's talking about money markets to a degree, and her opinions on cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. So that's what we got for you guys today. Also, we have the return of our friend Space Returns. Space! How you doing? You're muted, Space.
Meow, meow, meow. I'm good. Now I'm unmuted. Happy Harry Styles Day. Next week, Bob's Burger movie comes out. Check that out. Support local. Eat fresh.
This is important. This is the way. Yeah. Well, happy to have Space back with us. A musician, host of Pop Culture Carnivores, which is a podcast that you guys can find on all the great podcasting places, as well as now you guys have a little TikTok channel running. So support on TikTok, because that's where you get the quickness. But yeah, check them out. Always covering cool topics. Now we're about to hop into things. And as long as you're ready, my friend. Again, our first topic of the day, and this is the Weimar Republic. What is the Weimar Republic? What do it do? Where do it go? So that's what we're going to cover. It's also a topic that people probably are more familiar with in their history books. Is related to this is the Treaty of Versailles. You remember that name from the history books? The Treaty of Versailles, the ending of, what was that, World War One? Was it World War One or World War Two? World War Two. And no, that's World War One, right? Hyperinflation 2. Yeah. I'm like, no, that's World War One. Come on, bro, right? Yeah, it's World War One, but it leads to World War Two, and so this is part of the precedent for what created World War Two. Why, because those are if you do a little bit more research, the German people aren't happy. They're upset about something, and so what are they upset about that leads into this? Why do they feel like they deserve better? And we're gonna learn about that stuff. So it's almost like a history class every time, right?
Yeah.
You can choose to watch my screen if you'd like there, Mr. Boone, and I will be making it full screen. So without any further ado, I'm gonna stop talking, and we're gonna hit this thing running.
Like pretty much all countries, Germany suspended its gold standard during World War I to make funding everything easier, with the intention of getting back on track after winning the war and annexing productive regions, making the losers face huge damages, and so on. However, they lost the war, so the exact opposite happened. After signing the armistice of November 11th, 1918, which effectively ended World War I, Germany retreated to its pre-war borders, and on the 28th of June, 1919, the Treaty of Versailles imposed debilitating conditions on them. Strangely enough, the treaty didn't really end up pleasing anyone. The Germans found the terms too harsh, yet the French and Italians wanted more drastic conditions. Later on in...
I forgot to mention, we do this in 2x speed. I think... What was that? You can't hear it? Or you are here? What were you? You were snapping about something. Oh! That's what he's doing. So let me pause for a second. That's what you were doing that you couldn't hear me. I was like, you were able to hear the video though. I forgot to mention, we're doing this in 2x speed. So it'll take your ears a second to adjust to it. But it is how I like to consume information, how you can consume that much more information. So try it out. With this video, obviously we're already in 2x speed. So maybe if you're listening to this and then you're going into the 1 sections, if you don't want to listen to this in normal speed, that would be a perfect time to turn it down. You can go lower. So maybe cut it in half, and that'll make the portions where they're talking about these topics that much slower for you if you prefer that. But otherwise, try to adjust. It's a good way to intake information and a lot of information. I'll pull that back just a little bit. And here we go. Off to the races, folks.
Anyone. The Germans found the terms too harsh, yet the French and Italians wanted even more drastic conditions. Later on, in 1921, it was decided that Germany needed to pay war reparations to the tune of 132 billion gold marks. Not in its own currency, but in an accepted one or in nature by sending goods or commodities. That amount represented $31.5 billion back then, and in today's dollars, we'd be looking at roughly 400 billion. However, only 50 billion of those gold marks had to actually be paid. The rest was basically fictional debt, which was supposed to look good in headlines and please the public. Unfortunately, even so, this crippled Germany and the mark. Before World War I, 4.2 marks bought you $1 US. Shortly after the war, you would have needed 7.9, and by the end of 1919, 48 marks would have been required. Despite initially stabilizing at about 90 marks per dollar in early 1921, the 50 billion gold mark payments took their toll on the mark, which started in 1922 at roughly 320 per dollar. As of a certain point, Germany could just no longer afford to make those payments and stopped, making the French and Belgians decide to occupy their industrialized rural area, despite the resistance and general strike of the workers. To support the strike and make various payments, Germany kept needing to print currency, and things degenerated dramatically, with the dollar being worth 4.2 trillion marks in November of 1923. All in all, the Versailles Treaty was definitely responsible to a large degree for this hyperinflationary mess, and in the end, it could even be considered one of the main causes of World War II.
All right, so that was a very...
This is the Rich Dad's Podcast with Andy Tanner, the show that...
This is a very basic intro into what the Weimar Republic was facing, or what the Weimar Republic specifically is what was Germany, before it was called Germany. Really, it was the Weimar Republic. So that's what that is. And the specific topic of the Weimar Republic, when you're talking about it as far as finance goes, it's typically understanding, their hyperinflation situation, what happened in the Weimar Republic and what led to that hyperinflation. And so we kind of learned this a bit earlier in the very first video, I believe it was, that we did in this series, which was that oftentimes nations will abandon whatever their golden standard thing is, or whatever that monetary practice is that keeps things stable in times of war. And war is usually what leads them to abandon for either a short period of time or a longer period of time what that good, solid working monetary policy is. And then after that might cause them to do something necessary to combat it. So, yeah. Any takeaways from you on that first video? It's pretty short since we were listening to 2x speed and stuff like that, but
Yeah. It was good. I'm part of the population that is adjusting to the 2x speed, but seeing having the graphics up helped.
Yeah. See, and this is something that's this is a series that's great to watch back over. And again, I would suggest trying to go through with the 2x. But if it does not work for you, just slow this portion down. You can take it down a notch. It'd be that much. I feel like it's that much easier. Probably around 13 seconds after a video starts, and that last one was right in the middle there of that time that it takes you to really start to adjust to these. So the second video here is by The Plain Bagel, sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare. They'll explain all that to you. This is actually, wait, I think we got one ahead. Yeah, we did. It was supposed to be this one. Excuse me, that's actually one ahead. This next video that we're going to be watching is specifically on the Weimar Republic's hyperinflation, slightly longer than the previous one. And this is covering 1,000 billion mark notes by Mike Maloney. And they run a gold and silver channel, trying to educate people on things like that, what's known as sound money.
Here is a very interesting display. This starts in 1871, so this is the beginning of the classical gold standard. Germany started the classical gold standard. But here you've got gold and silver coinage, and then you have notes that represent the gold and silver coinage. And they actually had a certain amount of gold in the vaults, and a bill to represent that gold in circulation, a 1-to-1 ratio, fully backed. And then you get down, this is more fully backed currency. And then 1871 to 1914. So this takes you up to the outbreak of World War I. And in 1914, that's when they suspended redemption rights. You could no longer go into the bank and ask for your gold or silver for that bill. And then they lit up the printing presses. And the results here are very interesting. Here's 1 mark. We start out here with 1 mark actually purchasing something. And you go drawer by drawer, and now we've got 50, 100, 1,000. And then we get to the Weimar hyperinflation here, 105,000. This is a 50,000 mark note. This is a 100,000 mark note. And then we go to a 1,000,000 mark note. And we're up to 50 millarden. Now, a millarden is like a billion. 100 millarden, $100 billion note. And we get toward the end of the Weimar hyperinflation. 1,000 billion mark note. And then the introduction of the Rentenmark, a temporary currency. I believe it was November 15th, 1923, that they introduced this and hyperinflation stopped. It took 1 billion marks to buy one Rentenmark. One Rentenmark was worth 23 1/4 cents US.
It was worth 23 1/4 cents.
Yep. That is how much it was worth, which is I'm like, that sounds similar to the price of a Russian ruble today. Like, honestly, because it's still down. Still, like, I mean, it's like, you know, like over a larger period of time, ruble's down. It's made a correction from where it was going earlier in the year after its invasion of the Ukraine. But still down.
Strong Zimbabwe vibes.
Yeah, goodness. Seriously though. But yeah, that's not to be ignored either. Like, you know, like when they we were talking to Space Returns about it, and I was like, yeah, they have 20% tax on these like different like things and stuff. And he's like, that's ridiculous. I'm like, yeah, it's crazy, but like you can try to fight it somehow. So the next video that we have is a little bit deeper in the German economic crisis. And I'm like, it just so happens that by the time we got to this portion of the series, the markets are kind of like in a downward tumble. And again, I don't think this is a Weimar type of situation. I think we have a stronger grasp of monetary policy and what happened in history. But these same things that cause, you know, these catastrophic situations for some economies and stuff like that in history can be seen today. You know, you can see patterns of things like unfolding in the world, and like when something does, like, you know, so like a war happens or whatever it is that happens, you know, just being able to go, you know, what has happened in the past in these situations. Okay, if this happens, what happens next? And so again, I'm like, this is not a Weimar situation, but you can expect some decrease in some of these assets and, like, you know, currency, etc. And, like, you know, we just saw it with Russia. Like usually something tends to happen around these times, and so it like helps you become a better investor if you can understand. Again, we're trying to cover the macro of the market and understanding that, because, you know, growing up, or I'm like still growing, but you know, in my youth, I would have not understood so much that some of these situations that happen, or what you know, whatever monetary policy decision making, how that affects gas or milk and this and that. And, you know, most of the time we're just going to hear things like, oh, it's the supply chain being backed up. But it's like, yeah, but like, wouldn't you be able to get people to work still if they were making such a substantial amount and it actually mattered in today's economy? Yes, you would. There wouldn't be an issue. But there's something holding them back from doing that. It's not that people are just lazy and they don't want to like make any money. It's the value that you're giving them that's like holding up these situations. If we have so many more jobs and stuff. And I know there's a discrepancy between like where the most jobs are coming back from the pandemic and whatnot. But we're pretty much, you know, in America, like people are out and about and doing stuff very similar to before. And so like, how is there still that issue? Why wouldn't we be back and at it? And blaming it all on supply chain when there were periods of time when these companies, if you look back far enough in the pandemic, were stocking up on a bunch of this stuff. They stocked up on a bunch of stuff. They bought more than they figured they needed for periods of times. So it's not just that. There's more at play. There's usually more than one thing at play, and you got to try to understand them. And so that's why we're listening to these videos first on this topic, and then we're going to go into what quantitative easing is and get a better understanding of that. And again, I feel like it's much more sound than a lot of these governments in the past were allowed to get away with. But it's worth listening to. So for the next video, I'm about to set your sounds in. And anything that you'd like to say before we jump into it?
Yeah, there's a reason why when I passed by Burger King last week and they were giving $1,000 sign-on bonus. Like, I don't know.
In today's video, we're going to look at the economic crises affecting Germany in 1923. There are 3 essential questions that you need to be able to answer by the end of this video. The first is, what was the economic situation in Germany following World War I? The second, why was the French and Belgian occupation of the Ruhr region so disastrous for Germany? And the third, what is hyperinflation? Why was there hyperinflation in Germany? And how did hyperinflation affect regular everyday Germans? So let's look back at World War I and its economic effects. Basically, throughout the First World War, Germany had been spending all of its gold reserves on the war itself, and by the end, there was no more gold left. Another thing that was affecting Germany was the Treaty of Versailles, which you should remember was the agreement that officially ended the First World War. This treatment was problematic for Germany as it forced Germany to give up key industrial areas like Silesia, which was known for its coal fields. And as a result, Germany didn't have the income from that area to boost its economy. And the second thing about the Treaty of Versailles, but probably one of the most important issues, was the reparations bill of £6.6 billion, which Germany had to repay to the Allies. Many Germans found this unfair, as it was too heavy for the country to bear, especially while recovering from the war. For example, in 1921, Germany paid £50 million as their first reparation installment. However, in 1922, they repaid nothing. And with all of these financial issues, by 1923, Germany was virtually bankrupt. One of the very first crises that Germany faced in 1923 was that of the Ruhr region. As I said before, Germany stopped paying reparations in 1922, and this really upset France because France also had to pay back war loans to the USA, and they needed the money that they were going to be paid from Germany. As a result of Germany's failure to pay its reparations, France and Belgium decided to invade the Ruhr region and begin taking what was owed to them. And this was completely legal under the Treaty of Versailles. They were allowed to go and take what was owed to them in kind. So they took things like industrial machinery, manufactured goods, and confiscated raw materials. The German government responded to this by urging the Germans who lived within the Ruhr area to follow a policy of passive resistance, which basically meant going on strike. The French in turn responded to the strike by arresting those people who obstructed the French and bringing in their own French workers. And we begin to see the Weimar Republic weakening, as Germans strongly resented the failure of their government to resist this French and Belgian occupation of the Ruhr. However, there wasn't really anything that the Weimar government could do. It had no choice. It had to allow the French and Belgians to invade the Ruhr because of the Treaty of Versailles, which they had signed. Furthermore, Germany's reduced troop numbers of 100,000 were no match for the 750,000 of the French army. The Germans were simply not prepared for and could not risk starting another war. In terms of results, the invasion of the Ruhr didn't do very much good for France, as they didn't gain very much. However, it crippled Germany because the Ruhr was a key industrial area, with most of the factories in Germany located there, and 80% of the German coal and iron based there. So this disruption increased Germany's debts because they couldn't gain money from their key industrial area, and this caused a large increase in unemployment, and, due to the factories now producing for France and Belgium, a shortage of goods. This shortage of goods meant that the prices of 4 things went up. This is normal, and it's called inflation. If there are fewer things to buy, the price of each individual thing goes up. So this meant that regular everyday Germans had to spend more to maintain their standard of living. At the same time, the German government needed more money to pay for their debts. But with high unemployment and factories failing, they were receiving less money from taxes. To solve this problem, the German government decided to simply print more money. By 1923, the government had 300 paper mills and 2,000 printing jobs just to print more money. This caused the value of the German currency to decrease because there was much more money in circulation. There were more marks in circulation, and so the value of each...
Okay. I wanted to stop it for just a second because I wanted to put one thing there. Remind people of something they said. First, and it's funny because like this also just kind of just happened this morning. Somebody in the Halo community, this one Halo streamer, she's like, yeah, like, I feel like Biden hasn't really done anything, and I'm going to derail this away from the politics because, it's headed in that situation too. But I feel like Biden, what has he done, this and that, and, people are like, well, potentially forgiving $10,000 in student loans, and it's like, okay, that's whatever. And then her second thing was, and this is what I really wanted to focus on, which was, and also, I don't understand politics or anything like that, but why does it cost me this much to buy a gallon of milk? And it's like, they just alluded to that in this video that we're watching here, because again, and I think I mentioned this earlier, where yes, they'll say, supply, we have supply chain backup and this and that. We were just talking about supply chain backup and this and that. But and then somebody commented after I gave my response to that tweet, and they argued that me talking about quantitative easing and the fact that we printed out all of this money, we printed out 80% of all United States dollars from 2020 to 2022. We just stopped a little bit ago, really in 2021. But if we print about 80% of all our dollars, then you inflated your monetary supply, no matter where it's going. And that's then the person was like, well, then why are the prices just bad, or not just bad in the United States? Why are they bad globally? And because the United States dollar, as we covered with the gold standard and stuff like that, is the global reserve currency. And so if it happens in our economy, it's going to ripple onto the other economies because they are using our dollar. So inflating our dollar is not just something that our people have to settle with. It's everybody who's using that monetary system have to deal with that to some degree. That person's other argument was it's a supply chain issue. It's not anything to do with quantitative easing and them printing out 80% of the dollars and this and that. And you got the time. And I'm like, okay, as they just explained in this video, first comes the fact that you print out a bunch of money. That's the first portion of things. After that, it creates supply issues due to cost and other factors. But it does create that, and that's part of it. And so what's the bigger, we're focusing on macro, just not just individual elements, though we're pointing into some individual elements. The macro is you print out a whole bunch of something, or if you inflate something, then it does start to create the supply issues because there's a rush to grab up stuff, and then eventually there's an issue. But that was really prevalent, and I feel like a lot of that language is being used consistently in today's media, supply chain issue and this and that, without very much mentioning at all. The thing that they never really talk about is how much money we printed. Like, oh, I don't understand how that's always missed. How is it always missed? Like, we don't ever talk about that. We're just like, yeah, this president, the economy, and whatever the heck. And it's like, okay, but the Federal Reserve isn't necessarily a part of one of the administrations. That's just a fact. It's not part of like, so. And I feel like people not knowing that is also part of the reason why they have so much division toward these individual administrations. Because like, you should take what's happening with the economy away from the president at the time. Yes, there's certain policies, like the policies and decision making that they make that like you feel, or whatever the heck the case, like, oh, should the money go to the Ukraine or should it go to students or whatever, that sure, have your discrepancies, but like the general macro economy and stuff like that, like, is out of that administration's hands for the most part. They can try and fix it, and that's what they can do. They can try to fix it to some degree, but it's not their decision. So it's pointing out to a lot of Americans, y'all be arguing at each other for like no reason. It's just wild, bro.
Wild.
Right. Back into this thing.
At 300 paper mills and 2,000 printing jobs just to print more money. This caused the value of the German currency to decrease because there was much more money in circulation. There were more marks in circulation, and so the value of each mark went down. So what do we call this? We call this hyperinflation. And as the prices of goods continue to rise, the value of money continued to fall. So a loaf of bread, which might have cost you in 1918 0.63 marks, by November 1923, that same loaf of bread will cost you about 201 trillion marks. So you can see that the value of money had gone down enormously, and because its value was changing so quickly, we call it hyperinflation. The results of this were numerous. First, the positives. A few people did benefit from hyperinflation. Farmers profited from rising food prices, and some businesses were able to pay off their loans because the loans had lost value. And other businesses were able to buy up smaller failing businesses very cheaply. So small businesses and farmers did benefit from it in a way. However, most people suffered. Everyone suffered from the shortages because as the value of the German currency decreased and became worthless, foreign suppliers refused to accept marks and their goods and imports dry up. Furthermore, everyone had to pay higher prices for goods. Everyone finds it difficult to buy what they needed because of the shortages. So even the wages were going up. And wages go up a lot, so much so that people had to carry bundles of money home in baskets and even in wheelbarrows. Many workers had to be paid twice a day so that they could rush out and buy more goods before the prices rose even further. And some suppliers refused to take money at all and instead asked for payment in kind. They wanted to trade goods. So give me those apples and I'll give you these oranges was the kind of trade they wanted to do. One of the hardest hit groups was neither the poor, nor was it the wealthy. It was the middle class. People with savings. This was because people with money in the bank or insurance policies or in pensions saw these savings become worthless. So if you were a fixed income earner, for example, you were retired, what had been able to buy you all of your supplies for a year and would last you until old age, now could barely buy you a cup of coffee. In today's video, we looked at the economic crises facing Germany in 1923. We saw how World War I left Germany virtually bankrupt and unable to pay its war reparations debts. This in turn led to France and Belgium invading the industrial Ruhr region. When they invaded the Ruhr region, it increased financial burden on Germany. And as a result, the German government printed even more money, leading to hyperinflation. Hyperinflation greatly affected the German population, and more people began to turn their back on the newly created Weimar Republic. In our next video, we're going to look at how a new chancellor named Gustav Stresemann effectively deals with these problems. But will it be enough?
Any new information from you there on those topics, or any takeaways? And again, like a point of going through this and including this in the series is not to be doom and gloomy or whatever the heck. I do not think we have a Weimar Republic type situation on our hands here, in the 21st century or in the United States. However, being so polar, being at one end, this because it's an extreme that we're covering, right? But seeing those extremes lets you see what's actually unfolding in the current today when people have questions about like, so inflation can cause this to happen, so inflation can cause the price of goods to go up because of this happens, so a certain level of inflation can cause people to not like this currency, or other people or other governments or whatever to not want to do certain levels of trade, or for the wages at your job to go up, and wages are going up everywhere and there's more places for employment. However, you're not earning enough money fast enough. And like those are the more so like common topics of today that I feel like are not explained in that same light, because we're not really looking at history and trying to take from everything. Or if we do look at a situation like this, we go, that's it. So this person, so you're a cuckoo and you're just bringing up the most extreme situation. It's like that's not the case. But we can learn from these situations, and we can definitely profit if we understand. Because as they mentioned, people that understood these situations profited more so than people that did not understand these situations, specifically people in the middle class that felt that, and these are the people that have been taught their entire lives that, you save and you put your money in the bank and that's where it goes and this and that. And that's the best place for it. Meanwhile, other people are happier trading between some other type of good, some type of service, or what have you, and then other people are just investing in assets, and that's how they're avoiding these downturns in the market. And so that's why we're covering this today. Not to be so. Hopefully that made sense to people. And sorry, I feel like I always I'm like, oh, we're sharing opinion space, and then wait, James Brown moment.
No, it's good, man. It's good. Yeah. Hold on. What was we were talking about? Inflation, rising prices,
supply chain from it, trades, goods, and services, Weimar.
Yeah. The minimum wage. When $15 is finally federally approved, you will probably need it to be $18 because it's not
keeping up,
catching up to inflation now.
Yeah, and that was something they covered here. Again, we were watching a very extreme of it, but it's you should be able to see that in today's, if you look at the two and you compare, you're like, okay, it's not that bad. But this is totally happening. And so this has happened before in places because of what? Because you print out a bunch of money. And so, yeah, we should learn from these things. And as they were alluding to at the very end of the video, now we're going to cover how such and such fix this issue. And it's so these issues can be fixed. There's things in place that do that. But along with the QE2 system, there is quantitative easing and there is quantitative tightening. And we are currently in a quantitative tightening situation, which is where the Federal Reserve increases those rates, which is where we stop printing out that money. It's if you're more familiar with cryptocurrency and you're coming from the crypto world and listening to this series, it's like rebasing. When they rebase the token, you printed out a whole bunch of these tokens and you're still holding that same amount of tokens in your wallet, and now all of a sudden you got less tokens, or the value of the tokens changed, and they're expanding and contracting the economy in that sense. And so that's what's happening in those situations. That's what we're kind of covering. Yeah. All right. Gonna get this next video up. This is actually that quantitative easing video that I wanted to mention before. So this should just be a quick video explaining what quantitative easing is, getting a better understanding of it, how what people call the money printing machine. What is it? How does it actually work? Because it's not like there's no rules applied to.
Make sure to subscribe.
Hit the bell icon if you want notifications for future videos. If you have any feedback or topics you want me to cover in a future.
Oftentimes people are kind of just oh, it's just a money printer. It's just money out of the. There are rules in place. However, it is definitely a money printer, and we've always had money printers though. But what are the rules of this one? How does it work? What should you be looking out for? What's there to understand? So yeah, anything from you before we jump into this one? Space?
Nope, I'm good to go.
This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Go to skl.sh/theplanebagel5 to get a free 2-month premium trial. Quantitative easing is something we've seen pop up around the world ever since the 2008 financial crisis. The US, UK, Eurozone, and Japan are just some of the countries that have implemented the unconventional monetary policy as a way of helping their economies recover from the recession. But what exactly is quantitative easing? Well, the short of it is that it involves printing money, which is thought to encourage business activity. But it's a little more complicated than just creating dollar bills and tossing them from a helicopter to cheering crowds and businesses below. The central bank will use the newly created money that it produces to purchase assets from the market. And while this isn't different from what the institution actually typically does, it's the scale and the type of assets involved that makes quantitative easing so unconventional and, quite frankly, controversial. So let's go through how quantitative easing works and what it means for the economy on today's Plain Bagel. A country's central bank, like the Federal Reserve in the US and Bank of Canada in Canada, is the steward of the country's currency. They are intended to be an independent institution from the government. And among their responsibilities is the task of actually issuing money and managing its supply, while simultaneously helping the economy maximize employment and stabilize prices. So when a country starts to show signs of a slowing economy, the central bank will typically step in to try and boost business activity through expansionary monetary policy, which involves influencing the country's currency to encourage more spending and lending. One way they do this is by changing their policy interest rates, which you hear about in the news quite a bit, especially within the last decade. By lowering interest rates they pay on their deposits that they receive from other banks, the central bank applies downward pressure to other interest rates within the economy, from interest rate paid on government bonds and corporate debts to car loans and mortgages that you or I might take out. The idea is that a lower cost of borrowing will encourage spending, which is a fair assumption. If you were going to buy a house, for example, you might be more inclined to make a current purchase if you could borrow at a lower interest rate. Whereas if interest rates were higher, you might decide to hold off and, at the very least, increase the down payment you make before making the purchase so that you don't have to borrow as much and pay the expensive interest rate that you're going to be charged. Low interest rates have prevailed in most developed countries since the 2008 financial crisis. But as you would expect, interest rates can only go down so far. In the US and Canada, the central bank interest rates are in the low single-digit range. And in the Eurozone and several other countries around the world, rates are actually in the low negative range. And so with little to no leverage left in that department, many central banks have implemented or considered expanding quantitative easing programs, first started a decade ago.
ago as a way to continue stimulating their economies. Quantitative easing, or QE as it's commonly referred, is the process by which the central bank injects money into the economy. But while it's often imagined as a central bank printing dollar bills and giving them to banks and corporations, it's not that simple. Firstly, the move is actually mostly digital, with the central bank simply crediting themselves electronic funds, and the money enters the economy through open market operations. That is, the central bank inserts itself into the market as a buyer and purchases securities and assets using its new money, typically buying government bills and bonds from other banks. This action increases an economy's money supply. By buying the assets, the central bank is replacing them with new money, as if pulling the funds from an alternate dimension and injecting them into the economy. The process also leads to the central bank increasing or expanding its balance sheet, since it will end up holding financial assets. So, why does the central bank consider doing this? What's the benefit of buying financial assets from the market? Well, one of the main objectives of QE is to lower the costs of borrowing, i.e. they're looking to ease a country's financial markets. This is done during periods where financial markets are tight, or when banks are more reluctant to lend, like after the financial crisis when the credibility of many businesses and organizations became less certain. Now, when overnight rates are near 0% from the central bank's influence, banks already borrow at a cheap cost, but the rates they turn around and charge on other longer-term loans may still be high. So by increasing money held by the banks, which is sitting around not earning a very high return, the hope is that the banks will be more willing to lend out to businesses and consumers. And since there's more banks with more money to lend, they will ideally compete and lower interest rates, making it easier for market participants to borrow and spend, thus theoretically saving the economy. This is why higher money supply is thought to lead to lower interest rates. Money becomes easier to come across, so it costs less to borrow. QE can also decrease interest rates by lowering the yield on financial assets. As a quick refresher, yield is the income return an investor receives when they purchase an investment. It's interest or dividend payments divided by the price paid, the market price. By buying financial assets.
Okay. Oops. I was gonna let it run for just a second, but I wanted to pause just to say that, like, notice that thing that they just spoke of, which was that increased money supply typically leads to less interest. So most recently we had like negative interest rates and stuff like that, which if increased money supply leads to less interest, and we're at negative interest rates, there must be a pretty extensive money supply. There must be quite a bit of money out there for you to go negative, right? Just by like what he's saying. And I'm like, you know, not in any camp, but it's like just by what he's saying, that like helps you understand what to expect from the market. So like as these cycles play out, because these things start to create a cycle, you need to understand which is which. And so I spoke on quantitative tightening, which I think we will watch something for. But basically, we stop printing out all the money, you know, and we do something else. Typically, interest rates are increased, obviously. And so what is the Federal Reserve doing most recently? And a quantitative tightening also means that we're no longer printing out all that money. You know, as they were mentioning, we're not lending out all that money. We're tightening things up. And so what happens if the monetary supply all of a sudden stops expanding like that? Well, then interest rates should go up, from what this guy was just explaining. Then it should be the exact opposite of negative. Anything from you before we jump back in? Sorry for that jump out real quick, y'all.
Oh no, not at all. Just the idea of the government and doing a blood transfusion, but hoping to make money off of it. Is that right?
I mean, kind of, yeah, kind of.
They're inserting theoretical money, hoping to make actual money off of it because they're boosting up.
Yeah, you're boosting things up because, like, yeah, so if it's like, you know, it's like when you get a loan from the bank typically, but they're just like, you know, but there's the Federal Reserve or the central bank that is allowed to just concoct money, just make a magic spell to make that money to give out that loan. Because why does the bank typically give out a loan to somebody? It's because they believe that person, or you're approved of a loan because they believe, like, let's just go to approving a loan, or wherever, whatever have it be. Even if you're getting an apartment or a house or something like that, they have to approve you for it. Well, how do they decide that? Because they believe that you will come up with that money, which is the same as a bank loaning out millions of dollars to some company or whatever have it be, because they believe that loaning them out that money will allow them to produce money. And in the case of normal individuals, we need that place to live so that we can just sustain a normal job. Like, right? And giving us that place to live means that we will be pumping out this money, which will then go to that company. And so, you know, the banks will take that money and it go back to the government. But what's controlling it is the Federal Reserve, which is technically not even like a part of the government. It's like its own independent branch thing. But that's what's controlling that. So it's understanding that, like, the same way that you need to get approved for things like that so that you can make that money, that's what the banks are doing. And so yes, totally true. The issue comes like when there's when you know, because like anybody else, if this is being done by humans, you can be reckless or you can be emotional. That's why people are like, you know, maybe computers are better for some things, or why people like blockchain so much, honestly, because it's handled by math and computer programs, and you can take that human emotion out of it. humans don't get to decide, oh, maybe we should print more, maybe we should do this. Oh, well, these people are hurting over here, this or that. The math is going to be the math, and it's just going to do what it does. The program is just going to do what it does, whatever it's made to do. It's not going to put your emotions into play. It's not going to put your emotions into play over the pandemic and be like, we should send out stimulus checks to everybody now. Which, yes, it does mean we have to increase more, but let's do it because the world's hurting. A program doesn't care for that. A program is just going to continue on as it was supposed to do unless the actual market creates a situation where it needs to adjust and tighten up. And so that's also where you get things like rebase coins and stuff, like and how those factor in. But I just wanted to stop it for that portion and kind of explain some of that stuff. Anything from you, Space, before we jump back in? Don't get one on some things. But yeah, I mean, you kind of started this off. Yeah, and thanks for that input. Yeah, that blood transfusion.
That's what it is.
Thus, theoretically, saving the economy. This is why higher money supply is thought to lead to lower interest rates. Money becomes easier to come across, so it costs less to borrow. QE can also decrease interest rates by lowering the yield on financial assets. As a quick refresher, yield is the income return an investor receives when they purchase an investment. It's interest or dividend payments divided by the price paid, the market price. By buying financial assets like treasury bills, the central bank increases its price by bidding it up, thereby lowering its yield with interest rates remaining constant. This has a number of effects. For one, it can make it easier for the government to borrow money moving forward. For example, imagine the government has issued $1,000 treasury bills that pay $20 annually, so a 2% annual interest rate. And the central bank has bid up the price of outstanding treasury bills to $1,100. So they now only offer a yield of 120% to new investors. Because outstanding treasury bills only offer a 120% return to investors, the government could issue future treasury bills that pay, say, $18 annually and still offer a competitive rate, lowering their own cost of borrowing and allowing them to spend more. In this way, QE can actually help the government pursue fiscal policy, whereby the government increases spending to directly increase economic activity. Another effect of this is that it encourages more investment in riskier assets. Since government debt, which is fairly not risky, offers a less attractive return, investors may look to sell treasury bills and bonds to purchase higher yield corporate bonds and stocks, something that can help boost the stock market and improve capital market conditions, again making it easier to borrow money. So that's why central banks might pursue QE. But what we described isn't much different from the standard open market operations carried out by central banks. In fact, purchasing treasury bills is one of the standard mechanisms used by the Federal Reserve for managing the federal funds rate in the US. What makes QE different is its scale and the fact that it can span other financial assets outside of government debt. In the US, for example, the Federal Reserve found itself adding almost $4 trillion to the US economy after 2008. And from 2009 to 2010, the central bank bought just over $1 trillion worth of mortgage-backed securities, an investment that became unpopular and risky due to its exposure to the housing market. This not only helped boost money supply, but it unloaded unwatched assets from the banks, with the hope that it would improve confidence in the housing market and allow banks to continue providing mortgages to home buyers. Sounds like a pretty solid win-win, right? An institution that can print money buys assets investors don't want to boost the economy. What could go wrong? Well, as with most things in economics, the action is not without its own risks and downsides. For one, QE can lead to runaway inflation. Inflation is when the value of a currency falls. With more money in circulation, each dollar becomes less valuable, leading to rising prices. QE will most of the time cause inflation, and while most developed countries target a low single-digit inflation rate, they may accidentally push inflation much higher, potentially causing a crisis when QE is implemented. Secondly, injecting money into the economy may not necessarily lead to higher business activity. After all, the central bank can't force banks and businesses to use their newfound liquidity. And if institutions don't have confidence in the stability of the economy, they may simply pour their newfound cash. This is part of the reason why Japan has continued to experience deflation, even after implementing QE programs and boosting money supply quite a bit. And even US banks were found to have held quite a bit of the money they received from the post-2008 program rather than lending it out. Finally, QE programs are not intended to be permanent. Once the economy has recovered, gotten back on its feet, and inflation starts to rise, the central bank will often reverse its QE program, selling assets back into the market, shrinking or unwinding its balance sheet, and sterilizing or destroying money it receives to reduce money supply and keep inflation in check, effectively putting money back into the alternate portal it pulled it from. But the timing of this step is just as important as the decision of implementing QE. If done at the wrong time, it can make a bad situation much worse, taking away a crutch businesses and banks have come to rely on. Now, QE is thought to have helped quite a bit with the post-2008 recovery of countries around the world, according to institutions like the IMF. But we have yet to see countries fully reverse the programs they put in place. The US Federal Reserve's balance sheet still has roughly $4 trillion worth of assets, up from around $1 trillion in 2008. So while the process can support a country and bring cash to businesses in need, it requires extreme caution and care if a country wishes to maintain confidence in its economy and, importantly, its currency. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, make sure to hit the like button. If you like what we're doing here, make sure to subscribe. Hit the bell icon if you
All right. So yeah, any takeaways from that portion of things?
Could you go through that part or explain that part again where the buying assets that nobody wants still leads to inflation? I mean, yeah.
Yeah, like assets that nobody wants or needs, just basically like things that are not actually creating a profit. Like Robert Kiyosaki is somebody who often says this thing, and Kim too. But they're talking about buying up, like if you were to, because you use the idea of companies first and stuff, or investing in them. But yeah, if you send out all this money, or loan out all this money, in the case of the Federal Reserve or an individual bank, loan out all this money to a company that's producing a product that nobody actually wants or needs. So you printed out all this money, you made all this money, and you're like, all right, and I'm going to put it on this because everybody wants this, but nobody actually wants that thing. Then that thing is just going to sit there, and you kind of wasted your money, and there's no way to collect that money back from that thing because nobody wants it. It's like, that's just I feel like that's just the best explanation.
That's
of it.
weird.
And since nobody wants it, it's not going to be producing any returns. It's not producing any products. It's probably going to slow down the products that it's producing, and then it's not producing any returns. So it's effectively doing nothing. It's got no concept. Like, it's not really a powerhouse like you imagined it to be. And yeah, it's just not doing it for you. There's no reason to have that thing around. But here, let me play that real quick for them, and then we'll see if you.
To see countries fully reverse the programs that they put in place. Inflation starts to rise, the central bank will often reverse its QE program, selling assets back into the market, shrinking or unwinding its balance sheet, and sterilizing or destroying money it receives to reduce money supply and keep inflation in check, effectively putting money back into the alternate portal it pulled it from. But the timing of this step is just as important as the decision of implementing QE. If done at the wrong time, it can make a bad situation much worse. Taking away a crutch.
I feel like I feel like it needs to be back this far.
So that's why central banks might pursue QE. But what we've described isn't much different from the standard open market operations carried out by central banks. In fact, purchasing treasury bills is one of the standard mechanisms used by the Federal Reserve for managing the federal funds rate in the US. What makes QE different is its scale and the fact that it can span other financial assets outside of government debt. In the US, for example, the Federal Reserve found itself adding almost $4 trillion to the US economy after 2008. And from 2009 to 2010, the central bank bought just over $1 trillion worth of mortgage-backed securities, an investment that became unpopular and risky due to its exposure to the housing market. This not only helped boost money supply, but it unloaded unwatched assets from the banks, with the hope that it would improve confidence in the housing market and allow banks to continue providing mortgages to home buyers. Sounds like a pretty solid win-win, right? An institution that can print money buys assets investors don't want to boost the economy. What could go wrong? Well, as with most things in economics, the action is not without its own risks and downsides. For one, QE can lead to runaway inflation. Inflation is when the value of the currency falls. With more money in circulation, each dollar becomes less valuable, leading to rising prices. QE will most of the time cause inflation, and while most developed countries target a low single-digit inflation rate, they may accidentally push inflation much higher, potentially causing a crisis when QE is implemented. Secondly, injecting money into the economy may not necessarily lead to higher business activity. After all, the central bank can't force banks and businesses to use their newfound liquidity. And if institutions don't have confidence in the stability of the economy, they may simply pour their newfound cash. This is part of the reason why Japan has continued to experience deflation, even after implementing QE programs and boosting money supply quite a bit. And even US banks were found to have held quite a bit of the money they received from the post-2008 program rather than lending it out. Finally, QE programs are not intended to be permanent. Once the economy has recovered, gone back on its feet, and inflation starts to rise, the central bank will often reverse its QE program, selling assets back into the market, shrinking or unwinding its balance sheet, and sterilizing or destroying money it receives to reduce money supply and keep inflation.
All right. So I think that covered. I feel like was what I was saying really is that I didn't feel like I went back far enough to get the portion that you were asking for. And so yeah, there he goes. I explained it my way. He kind of just explained it in his way again. And so I don't know. Hopefully that makes sense. Like I was using like a different type of analogy to explain it because I'm trying to explain it at like a normal individualist level where he's like telling you like this is the Federal Reserve and this is how they print it out and like what they're doing. But it's basically supply and demand. It's like you're supplying something. Or you're consistently creating something that there's no actual demand from. In this case, printing out money that goes to a product or company that there's no actual demand from. It would be like if the Federal Reserve was like, we printed out all this money, and now we're going to give a whole bunch of it to Peloton. And they were still giving it to Peloton up until like a week. Like, there's no demand for Peloton right now. There was like demand for Peloton for a few months. And the demand started to diminish. And so why are you still giving Peloton all this money? They're not going to recoup that money. Now we have an issue. Like, you just gave a bunch of and so what do they do with all that money that you just gave them? Do they just hold on to it? What do they, but now they just got a bunch of stuff and everybody else is kind of hurting. So what's up? So, and that's a layman's term type of breakdown of what he's saying. Like, again, it comes down to supply and demand and whatever that was distributed to. Again, like a bank is not going to, or your credit checker, the housing people, whatever you're living as, are not going to approve you to live there if they don't believe that you can pay the rent. Simple as that. Like, if you can pay the rent, sure. All right, cool. You got like usually you make 3 times as much as the rent. Then cool, there you go. Now you got the place. And so you want to think of the Federal Reserve and the banks and stuff like that as the same way when they're talking about when you want to go get a loan or when you think about the Federal Reserve, that they want to make sure that you're making 3 times as much. That's how much you're gonna make it. I'm not gonna give you a loan if you're about to lose all the money. What's the point of that? But the issue with quantitative easing is when you do that because you're more likely to take riskier bets on things, and you do that and it doesn't work out. Then you need to employ a different tactic. So that was our first video on quantitative easing. Hopefully that made sense.
Yeah.
And we got want to do one or two more on the topic, and then we'll go into what is quantitative tightening, because I think that would be another good one to cover today. When we're looking at all these different videos, it's just it's the exact opposite when he was talking about how you fix quantitative
On September the
30th, basically. There's two sides of every coin. So yeah, before I think you had something to say, but yeah, if you have anything else to say, Space, before we hop into this one, I'll let you have the floor.
I'm good. It just seems like a lot of BS about investing in actual companies, and we don't. Is there any transparency on the taxes that they have to pay, or do they get that as a credit end of the year?
See, yeah, I mean, like, yeah, well, a lot of times they're buying, like, when they're investing in these companies, like, typically how they're doing it is, like, the Federal Reserve or whatever, is they're buying up bonds or stocks from these companies then, and so they're effectively giving new capital to the companies or whatever have you by that measure, not just directly like this unless it's a bank. Banks get, like, loan money, which is why they were talking about, these banks are still sitting on a large portion of the money that they got from these periods of time. But a company is going to have their assets actually kind of bought up in a sense. You're not going to go out there and buy the actual products. Oh, you want to give Walmart all this money. How do we do it? Well, they have products. Let's just buy their products from everybody. Like, no, it's not how they're doing it. They're buying up the bonds and whatever have you. And so that's like more the kind of concept, to my understanding. And like, yeah, if I'm missing anything, always feel free to like comment or whatever. But from the research that I've done, that's accurate. All right, into our next video. This is, again, what is quantitative easing from The Economist. I figured this would be a really good one to have in there. I know oftentimes these channels that we're kind of surfing through are not known by every, they don't all have like their check marks or whatever. But again, I've double checked or done my research on all the things that we're listening to, like not on that channel necessarily. I guess, of course, I go through their videos, but I'm talking about the topics. So I've cross-referenced them with other things, and I just feel like these are good videos that explain them. So The Economist is a well-known publication. It's one of the best publications suggested to investors and stuff to read from. You can get this app if you want. And that's why I thought it'd be a good one to include today. So we're gonna listen to The Economist talk about quantitative easing. All these videos are not from this year. If you're like, oh, a bunch of videos from recently, and they just know this is from like 2012. But these people are just talking about these concepts because they are not new. It's just, top level investors know what these things are, and the average person just maybe knows what some of them are. And so trying to cover them all in this fundamentals and concepts series so that we can become better investors. We can understand what these things mean. I had to sit down with my girl the other day. She's like, what are bonds? Like, what's the difference between bonds and stocks? I'm like, we should know this then, right? These are things we should know. Why are we being taught? We never taught this in school. We were taught, just put your money in the bank. You'll make this much by this year from this interest that we were not told changes. Like, we weren't told these things. Nobody was like, oh, the interest will change too. It depends on market macro situation. But enough from me. Get into this video. Thanks for joining us for this series. Catching individual parts. Let's hit it.
On September the 13th, the Federal Reserve, the US Central Bank, announced a new program of quantitative easing, the creation of money to try and boost the economy. Like Pavlov's dogs, the stock market salivated, as it has done on the previous occasions the Fed announced similar measures. Are these rounds of monetary easing actually necessary, and will they succeed in boosting the global economy? Quantitative easing involves the creation of new money, not the literal printing of money as used to occur, but the creation of money with a click of a computer mouse. When an investor sells government bonds or another asset to the central bank credits the bank account of that investor with new money. The aim is to encourage investors to leave safe assets like government bonds and invest in riskier assets like shares, and it's also to stimulate lending in the economy by keeping interest rates low. Does quantitative easing work beyond lifting the stock markets in the short term in a kind of sugar high? In the long run, critics fear that the effect of expanding the money supply, having more money chasing fewer goods, will be to create inflation. The positive case for quantitative easing is that it has prevented a very deep recession indeed. Although central banks may be creating money, the biggest source of money creation in the economy traditionally has been the commercial banks, and they have been destroying money by shrinking their balance sheets. The best way of thinking of it is as a bath. As the central banks are pouring in money through the taps, the banking system has pulled out the plug at the other end. And the net effect, if you look at the total amount of money in the system, particularly in Europe, is a balance. The money supply is barely growing at all. So without QE, the argument is the money supply would be shrinking very rapidly, just what happened in the 1930s and what led to the Great Depression. To sum up,
Quantitative easing is a controversial policy and an untested one, but the Economist view is that it's worth a try. The authorities have few other options, and the danger is that if they do not act, the world could fall into a very deep recession.
All right, so there it is again. These topics, yeah, like controversial, and it's understanding them all. But this is why I also can't have a bad like eye of them. Personally, I feel like it's something to learn from and learn that like you want to learn from. You have your opinions or whatever, but ultimately nobody wants to see your country or other countries just in famine or at despair or whatever. And so they're coming up with these ideas, these concepts, as a way to try to fix things and try to fix the world situation. However, as in any game, in the first video of the series that we watched, the guy was considering everything a game. There's winners and there's losers. And so the winners know how the game is played. And they understand all the bigger, the higher level macro terminology and situations that are at play. And so that's, again, that's why we're covering this, because if you do not understand these higher level things at play, what they're here to do, what they're here to fix, why is there opposition to Bitcoin and cryptocurrency? Why do people consider it and like part of that issue is well, if everybody switches to this other currency, what does that leave for us? Then we can't control things. And then what happens if things go awry, things go wrong, and we can't fix it? Whose hands is it in? Then we need everybody to jump back to this system or something. So that's also one of the arguments for why a government would be like, okay, this is why a lot of like more serious Bitcoiners welcome government regulation. Because without that level of regulation, then they're always going to be in fear of we don't want this or that. And it's like, especially as an American, I don't know, I'd rather have us work with Bitcoin and figure out that regulatory issue for individual companies and stuff like that, and for the country, so that we can benefit from it instead of being last. That's my bias on the American side. I think Space needs to step away for just a second, so we'll hold on anything that he's had to say about that. And then I think we've explained it quite a few different ways. And so we're going to watch this one quick one on what is quantitative tightening.
There have been many
Here, I'm going to go with this guy. So let me prep it up. Again, this is all part of a YouTube series that we are doing called the Crypto and Investing 101, the fundamentals and concepts. We're trying to look at a macro situation so that we can understand these topics, these ideas, and become better investors. I firmly believe without understanding the macro, there's no way that you're going to be able to actually play the game. You need to understand the fundamentals, how to catch, pivot, jab before you can dunk. You're not dunking if you don't understand that. You're getting called for a travel every time. So that's where I'm coming from with it. All right, I think Space is still on hold. So I'm gonna give you the ASAP. I don't know. Can you? Maybe you can hear us. He just got his headphones in, anyways. So we're gonna jump into this next one, and if we need to run anything back for Space, we'll run it back. Again, this is on quantitative tightening, so the other side of things.
Welcome to the Skillet Explains Finance video. This week, a short guide to an enormous term, quantitative tightening, thankfully known also as QT. What is it and what can it mean? Okay, in a nutshell, to stimulate an economy. This is what the Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, and central banks have been doing for some time, since the credit crisis some years ago now. You can lower interest rates. We've seen rock bottom interest rates across many large developed economies. Extra liquidity can be pumped into the system. They can do what's called asset purchases, quick bit of revision coming up on that in a moment, and money printing. Create liquidity. That's quantitative easing. Lower interest rates plus quantitative easing is an attempt to stimulate the economy, to get growth going, create a little bit of inflation, and so on. And we've seen a lot of that recently. Now the reverse would be this, to cool off an economy, and the US Federal Reserve is busy doing just that right now. You would impose higher interest rates. We've seen some rate rises over the last few months, but at some point the Fed feels it also needs to drain some of this extra liquidity from the system. So basically you throw the QE spanner into reverse gear, and this is called quantitative tightening. It's been called quantitative tightening. Just to stress, they haven't started doing this yet, but rumours have it later this year they will. So then, interest rates first of all, lower interest rates. Now the idea here, and we've seen this over the past few years from central banks, and the UK with record low interest rates, is that reduces the cost of borrowing for companies and consumers, that boosts the ability of firms to invest because they can borrow more cheaply to do so, consumers feel able to spend, and boy, have they. We've seen record levels of debt and even signs of inflation returning to the UK economy. Right? So that's the effect of lower interest rates. Now, you're the Federal Reserve, possibly the Bank of England, who knows, watch that space.
All right. Okay, I had to pause that really quickly because I feel like he really hit on something. This is a funny thing about like when we go through these videos is that again the purpose is to understand the macro, but I feel like you can really see things unfolding in the current market if you're like paying attention to these things that they're trying to tell you about these general topics, how they work, how the money flow actually works. Which is they just said during quantitative tightening, which is when we see increased interest rates, right? Where we see an end to the money printing basically. If we look at the left side of the screen here, let me make it big. Okay, so we're looking at the left side of the screen in this box he's got here, and it says this boosts reduce the cost of borrowing from companies and consumers, but this boosts the ability of firms to invest. I'm like, maybe I'm going the wrong way. Actually, no, we're on the wrong side. We're on the complete wrong side of it. I was going with but I'm like, I'm still going to state my view then, which is just that being balanced in this situation, and by what I mean by being balanced is having a sheet of not just assets but that currency. And so in this case, because what they call like deflation or quantitative tightening, it almost hurts to say this. Usually, Bitcoin is king, and Bitcoin is still king of cryptocurrencies. But during quantitative tightening, the dollar is going to become king. The dollar is king during quantitative tightening. And that's really what I wanted to get to, and I was hoping this kind of conveyed that a bit. But I feel like they're almost on opposite sides, where they're talking about this boosts the ability of firms to invest during, it says lower rates. That's actually the side of quantitative easing. So things going up, and that's because they're being given all that money, so they got more money to do with things. But what I wanted to really mention was that even during the down market time, which is like, it needs to be very smart investing, which is more like a Warren Buffett type of thing. It needs to be like on these proven products, which is also an issue with the quantitative easing side of things. But if you have cash during these times, these down market times, then you can invest in what becomes, which is a much harder time for other people to invest. So things are probably a lot lower in price. Everybody's not competing. There's not a whole bunch of demand at the time for these different things. And so, as far as the market goes, commodities, sure, people need food and oil and whatever have you, but for these assets, sometimes these yield-bearing assets, it's a lower time for them, and so you can probably get more. Sorry for the derailment. Back into this.
Place, you'll be thinking, right, if I want to dampen things down a bit, then I need to increase the cost of borrowing for companies and consumers. That will reduce the ability of firms to invest. Consumers will lose confidence as their mortgage rates start to creep up and so on. So you'll get less demand for goods and services, lower inflation, and a controlled rate of growth. The danger is consumers may have a crisis of confidence, and you may trigger an asset price collapse. So that's what central banks have got to grapple with. Now, quantitative easing, quick reminder, how does that work? Basically, a central bank buys selected bonds. It buys government IOUs, typically it selects high-quality ones, and it buys, let's say, AAA-rated corporate IOUs, mortgage-backed securities, and so on. It creates electronic money to pay for them, not new notes and coins per se, but electronic liquidity money, if you like, and gets a bigger balance sheet. Why? Because buying all these bonds means its balance sheet swells. You hear about the Federal Reserve's ballooning balance sheet. More about that in a moment. Now, on the other side of the equation, the institutions that are giving up their bonds to the central bank have surplus cash, electronic liquidity, if you like. The idea is they invest it to stimulate the economy. So they go out and buy other bonds, other instruments, and maybe go out and buy equities. The money finds its way into the economy via new loans, and so on. That is to stimulate demand. That's to get things going. Now, quantitative tightening is the reverse. It's never been tried before on the sort of scale the Fed might be contemplating in the US, but here's what could be involved. So, as bonds mature, so the bonds they're holding on their own balance sheet, as they mature, basically, capital is paid back by the original issuer, whether that's, say, the US Treasury, for example, if it's the government borrowing, or banks, stroke companies. The cash received, they reckon, will then be simply cancelled, drained out of the system, and that will gradually shrink the Federal Reserve's balance sheet, and also start to choke off the stimulus we've seen in the past. Because basically, these institutions, there'll be no further bond sales to the central bank, that was QE rather than QT, they'll have less spare liquidity as a result, and they'll be less able, therefore, to make other asset purchases and stimulate the real economy. So it's like QE in reverse gear. Now, diagrammatically, how would that look? You're wondering who's buying what from whom?
All right, so they actually just alluded to what I was trying to bring up before at the very end there, which is that like it kind of allows things to play out naturally. Let me try to roll back to right here where he has it. Since there's no more of this extra liquidity being sent out into the general market, there's less players for you to like, if everybody in the United States has $1,000 and they're actually cool for the next few months, then they're probably going to take that and either they're going to buy something really nice, and so stimulate the, or just so they want, stimulate the general economy in that sense, all these businesses and stuff, or they're going to invest it in something, which is also something they really want or whatever, but they're going to invest it in some type of stock or whatever have you, and that means that's going to increase, again, still in the same type of manner, increase these other companies and stuff like that. But what happens when everybody doesn't have that extra money? When everybody doesn't have that extra money, the only ones that end up succeeding are the best in town. It's no longer everybody gets a, you win chip. It's the best in town are going to win. And since they're the best in town, they're going to start to shoot to the top of the pack. They will still perform. There are still market performers. Somebody's always doing something. But oh, good. This work is killing me. But the best ones will start to rise to the top. And those will be the ones that a smart investor would focus on. The things that you actually need, not just anything. So that's why I wanted to stop at that portion. Sorry if that's really beating a horse over the head. I'm going to push play on this again, and we'll wrap up this section.
to make other asset purchases and stimulate the real economy. So it's like QE in reverse gear. Now, diagrammatically, how would that look? You're wondering who's buying what from whom? Well, in the first instance, let's say this isn't QT. In the first instance, you've got, let's say, the government issuing IOUs, pension funds buying them as a long-term investment, companies and commercial banks doing the same. So institutions acting as buyers for these IOUs. QE is basically this bit that I mentioned just now. That is those IOUs being given up by institutions in return for what I've called, loosely speaking here, cash, new electronic liquidity. QT, on the other hand, is saying, right, we've got $4 trillion of these things sitting on our balance sheet as a central bank, got to start getting rid of them, got to start draining liquidity from the system. So they'll receive cash at maturity from the original issuers and remove it from the system, simply cancel it is the idea, and meantime, the government will manage debt reissuance. So you've got a two-pronged attack, draining liquidity from the system. Now, of course, this is the reverse of QE. This is going to potentially drop stimulus in the economy. So you've got to be very careful how they do it and at what pace. So what could go wrong? Well, basically, as rates rise and stimulus is withdrawn, QT if you like, weak firms may go bust. So firms that relied on low borrowing may simply go to the wall, and maxed out consumers could follow them. All right, so consumers may rapidly rein in spending, and that could even lead to deflation. Asset prices may get hit hard, confidence evaporates, you could see stock market prices collapsing, potentially things go wrong. So the Fed's got to be incredibly careful about how it implements this new thing called QT. So to conclude, we're hoping to see the policy equivalent of watching paint dry, as basically Patrick Harker, the Philadelphia Fed president, put it. So steady as she goes. People will hardly notice this slow withdrawal of liquidity, slow and steady approach. But it's never been done before, so the consequences are not fully known, all right, and the Fed will be hoping to avoid what we've already seen, which is a taper tantrum. It tried to rein in QE in the past, and markets didn't react very kindly. So they'll be trying to avoid that and signal clearly for everyone what's going on. Big topic, plenty more to know, editor@killit.com, and to see some related videos that give you background to this, please go.
All right. Hopefully that made sense to folks. We are still lost our guest space returns for the time being as he deals with some other work related issues. So, he's still working from home type man, so doing his thing. You know what I'm saying? That's why he's able to join us today. So, we appreciate him for his time, regardless, and maturity, stepping away, but still being here. So far we've explained the Weimar Republic, what happens when you have massive money printing and when it goes wrong. And then we explained quantitative easing and the reverse side of that, quantitative tightening. So quantitative easing is how you stimulate an economy by printing more things. And then quantitative tightening is how you supposedly reel things back in so that we do not have, cascading inflation that just runs off. Because it can go for a while, but just letting it run away would obviously be bad. We've seen that time and time again, as we covered in other videos during this series. So that's the two sides of things, and they also mentioned some of the negatives that can happen with these things, or just some of the things, the negative side of things that you can expect while these are happening. So everything's not just sunshines and rainbows on the way up, and everything's not just sunshines and rainbows on the way down. If you have no clue what's happening. But if you know what's happening and you know how, what it creates, you can play it a lot better than just being like, well, things are happening. Well, gas is expensive today. I'm going to blame the president. That's how you want to participate in the market. Congrats, that is you. And this series is probably not for you, to be honest, because we're here to dig a little bit deeper than well, now I'm angry at somebody. Well, it's no, well, now what do you do? And what should you set up for? If you had a whole bunch of stocks or crypto before, how should you set up? What should you be looking out for? Should you be saving, and for what purposes? Is this a good time to get into the housing market or whatever have you? Is this a good time to be buying up crypto or stocks or whatever when you see? What should you do? And we're not here to offer financial advice or anything, but we're here to learn and from these greater macro situations and understanding those. Space, you've been away for a bit. Anything from you? Or are you able to hear any of that while you were away?
Yeah, I heard bits. I heard bits and pieces, but I will defer to your infinite knowledge and wisdom on this one.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it was interesting. It was interesting though. But yeah, in short, to sum it up for you, and again, if I'm explaining this and you're like, oh, that's counter. What do you feel like the person we just listened to was saying? And that was from Killick and Co. on YouTube. But if you feel like it was different than what they were saying, feel free to comment below in today's video on YouTube or on whatever social media platform we end up sharing the segment on, and let us know your thoughts. But basically, the process of quantitative tightening is what you can imagine to be the exact reverse of quantitative easing, where we're printing out all this money all of a sudden. When they get money coming in to the banks to pay for something or to pay off a debt, then it's being canceled out. So it's basically being deleted from circulation. And so since they're no longer, I feel like a lot of people have this idea of and they used to do it, but a lot of people have this idea of okay, well, you printed out a bunch of money, and they're actually imagining a physical printer printing out paper dollars on large scale. That's not how much most money's going around, folks. There's really no need to do that anymore. This is also why, cryptocurrency people are it could just be, digitized and use the blockchain, etc. And it'd be much more transparent. We'd understand things better because they're already doing it digitally. Somebody's clicking a button in an office on a computer, and they're sending more money to these individuals. And when it comes in, they have a balance sheet that they're controlling with servers and all that other stuff, the same way that cryptocurrency has to do it, but it's not public knowledge to you. But it's all coming in, and I'm like, maybe it is, and I'm not sure where that is, but I haven't seen it like that. I know they release minutes and stuff like that and do keep us up to date on these things though, so can't say it's not all totally public. But the money comes in, the purpose is the money comes in and they can delete it out of the system. And so now that money no longer exists to be spent or whatever have you by the greater economy. And so that is kind of the process of quantitative easing, where instead of a lot of it just going out and so hopefully being able to pay off this debt, now when that money comes in to pay off that debt, because again, they're only loaning it out to you because they believe that you can make profits. So all those profits that you have, they want them coming in now, and they're going to delete them from the system, cancel them out. So that's the process of, in a nutshell, quantitative tightening. So yeah, hopefully we're all somewhere. We're learning things. Again, previous to this type of system, we had the gold standard, or we had rice-backed dollars and tobacco-backed dollars and whatever have all these crazy different things. But the idea and the concept, and we had different type of banking system. The concept is always to try to fix these issues with currencies and what happens when your country has to go to war or has to supply for some type of famine or whatever the situation is. Whenever you have to print out more, most recently we had the equivalent of a war with COVID, or the C word, as the YouTubers like to say all the time. They're like, "Oh, you said the C word." Snaps. But what do you do about that? How do you prepare around it? And some of these processes obviously came into play. It's the same thing that we've been hearing in these videos, and that's how they handle it. And then how do they handle the other side of it? What does it mean? The Federal Reserve is not just operating from like a nothing playbook. They're operating from the playbook of the monetary policy that they're currently working with, which is QE2. And so on the other side of that playbook is quantitative tightening after you end QE, and they stopped quantitative easing. They announced that. So they're probably into quantitative tightening. And interest rates are raising, so they're probably into quantitative tightening without them saying it, without them needing to say it. If you understand these concepts and the things that are happening and like what they're supposedly using, because they release these minutes to us, then that's what's happening. That's what's happening. We need to know this. We need to learn from it. Yeah, that's why it's being included in our cryptocurrency in Investing 101, our fundamentals and concepts. This is a fundamental. This is a jab step. It is a pivot. It is all that before you actually dribble and take off. So, unless there's anything from you, Space, shoot it wet.
No, I'm just about to dribble and take off. I'm sorry. I already took off. So,
yeah. I'm saying take off. Some people like to learn mid-game. But all right, here comes our next video. This is actually the last video that we have today. I figured this would be a nice way to conclude this because we learned a lot about the United States dollar thus far. We learned a lot about how our monetary policy works. We learned a lot about how previous standards of currency work. The fact that they can work under different metals or oils, like the petrodollar system that we have, etc. All these different things, and maybe you understand a bit of cryptocurrency. Hopefully, I feel like most people already come from a cryptocurrency lens, which is why I started this whole thing. Before we do, we're going to do the Bitcoin standard and whatnot coming up next. But before we did all that, I figured it'd be great for this series if we started off with more of the traditional finance side of things and the history of that before we move into this more technological revolution of things that's happening, because you have to understand that first. And so as a segue video, we are going to listen to Elizabeth Warren as she talks about when you buy crypto, are you... Oh, the title is just Senator Warren, when you buy crypto, are you buying air?
That's some nice air.
Yeah, it's some nice air. But I think, before we really jump into it, I think it's funny to say something like that when we just talked about, like, you're not even actually printing out, paper dollars and printing them on with ink. Like a lot of times for these things, you're actually just printing out air. You're like, here's a button push. And so now it's on a balance sheet. Where did it come from? What money, what was traded or whatever to make it happen? We pushed the button. And I'm like, okay. And I'm just saying that just because it's like, it's funny that that's like what's actually, but then you have these like very strong opinions apparently about another system where it's a little bit more public and stuff like that, but doing doing similar things, but something is actually done to create that, though. Like the button, you can't just, there's no button just being pushed and now there's more cryptocurrency on the market. Not in that sense. Somebody needs to supply some type of yield, some type of liquidity, the same way that we see in the quantitative easing factors. More liquidity needs to be provided. Well, people need to come up with more liquidity and supply that liquidity. Otherwise, no more coins are being provided, you know? And when people stop, what do you see? You see the exact, when people stop supplying liquidity to a yield farm, and then now this is kind of like on the crypto side of things. What happens when people stop supplying liquidity to a yield farm? The price starts to tank. That's why, like, any crypto YouTubers or something like that you see that are like actually talking about like what to pay attention to in a project, as far as like, you know, what makes it a successful project? Liquidity. It's not the sales and the transactions. Like, you looking at the transactions of the price, like, that's cool. What about the liquidity? How much money is in that market so that I know if I were to take $1,000 out, $10,000 out, the market's still fine? Liquidity. And so there's that portion of things. That's just one man's talk. Not financial advice, not a financial advisor. But we out here trying to learn things on the internet. You know what I'm saying? All right, so here is Senator Elizabeth Warren. When you buy crypto, are you buying air? This is an NBC News segment. Yeah, unless there's anything from you, Mr. Space, we're going to take off our last video today, and we'll give our feedback on it. All right.
Pew, pew.
Pew.
And I do want to separate crypto from cryptocurrency. Sure. Which is, if I buy Bitcoin, am I buying a share of stock? Or am I buying a pork belly? Or am I buying euros?
Or are you buying air?
Oh, wow. Okay, you're going in.
I'm going in.
Yeah, what is
because that's the point, is that it's you're buying something that other people believe either is going to go up in value, presumably that's why you're buying it, or think it's going to go down in value, which is presumably why someone else is selling it. But that's it. It's a bet on whether this ephemeral token will become more valuable or less valuable.
Why isn't it the same as a pork belly? Or like, let's go with why isn't it platinum or silver? Since there's a finite amount of this, if we just look at Bitcoin, forget it. The idea is that there's a finite amount of Bitcoin that can be created by these computer programs.
Well, sort of.
Do you accept that?
Actually, I'm not even sure I'm there with you. Look, at the end of the day, with platinum, there's actually a thing, right? With Bitcoin, there's no thing that backs it up. And that's what makes it different. It's just belief. You and I assess. You assess the value's going to go down, I assess it's going to go up, and therefore I buy.
So it's more like this artwork.
No, because at the end of the day, I'm hanging that thing on my wall.
Right.
And I can enjoy it,
Should we
or I
sell
can
it?
throw darts at it.
You can sell it for money.
Sure you can. I mean, there are features about it that are the same, but it's not the same. And look, one of the things we have to remember about, there are a lot of things that come within this crypto world. So for example, we could be talking about, instead of Bitcoin, we could be talking about digital currency. Now that's something very different.
I think that's different too. I buy that. I accept that.
That's right, because that's a government-backed electronic transfer. And it can be denominated in dollars, it can be denominated in euros, it can be denominated in some new language that's made up. But that has something that backs it up. It has a government that says, if at the end of the day there's a run on this stuff, everybody wants theirs out, the United States government promises there will be something to back it up. And that's what banks are about. There'll be somebody there to back it up. But with Bitcoin, that's not the case. And then, of course, can we do one more category?
For just a second, had to stop her there because, as we just covered in multiple videos, there's something there to back it up that they can guarantee you is that if anything needs to happen, the debt ceiling is increased. And we're going to print out more money, which we're going to then have to tighten. At some point, it's going to have to tighten. Like, not that they won't be there, but at some point, there's going to have to be some type of tightening. And so the market's going to reverse at some point. And that's like, you know, it's a good lesson to just learn in cryptocurrency and markets in general. Because a lot of people just feel like, you know, if something's going up, it's going to go up forever. There's no change in them, like that thing, that good product. Then, like, something at some point is probably going to change the trajectory of that product, and so it's good to know how, when, what to do if that happens. What has historically happened when that happens? So I'll let her finish. Like her, you know, I don't really agree with everything Elizabeth Warren's saying. Obviously, I'm a crypto person and I see the value of it. But I also think she contradicts herself a lot during this. So, but let's go through this.
There's so-called stablecoin, which tries to look like a digital currency.
But more like a share of stock.
Well, what stablecoin says, I would describe it much more like a money market. It says we're going to hold our, whatever is the name of it, we're going to have it one for one with
not
dollars.
An algorithmic stablecoin
and that
like
way it can be traded on
UST.
exchanges, and you don't have to worry that the value today is 90 cents and the value tomorrow is $1.40 and the value the day after that is 85 cents. We're going to stabilize this and have a dollar to back it up. The problem with those is I get the basic promise, but are there really any dollars to back it up? Or any gold or any government
most
promise,
recently,
figure out what you
UST
think is
was
the thing of
proven
value.
to have
And that's the trick
$80-something
in the
billion
Bitcoin
dollars
space
to back
and
it up.
Stablecoin space is that there's no real government regulation of this stuff to make sure that the promises that's made when the trade happens actually
Governments have been regulating this stuff.
It's too soon to figure that out.
Well, I think we're moving here. So for stablecoins, actually not very hard. You'd say if you're going to make representations, then you actually have to be audited by some independent third-party auditor. A government would be an obvious one, but it could be somebody
UST
else who
was
is
most
independent,
recently
confident, trustworthy,
audited.
and has assets to back it up if they get it wrong. So that's not so hard on stablecoins. The harder one is what do you think Bitcoin is about? if you think it's about being able to transfer value without having to go through banks, and little side note, I think banks have done a really bad job of a lot of the things they're called on to do.
Yeah, the biggest advocates of Bitcoin sound like you.
Yeah,
right. I mean,
you're right.
like, to break up these big banks have been terrible, right?
That's exactly right. And they've cheated consumers, and they've kept prices high, and they're slow, and they won't cash a check, for days on end.
The first thing I ever worked on was getting them down from I actually worked on a campaign from 5 to 7 days to 3 to 5
There
days.
you go.
It was a huge victory.
A huge victory, right? That they only held onto your money for 5 to 7 days.
Well, it used to be right. It was legal for them. It took forever to have a check cleared when I was a kid.
So a lot that banks do wrong, if you think we can improve that in a digital world, the answer is sure you could. But in that case, let's do a central bank digital currency.
Are you there?
Oh, for a central bank digital currency, yes. I think it's time for us to.
So essentially, because the thing is, we look at every piece of paper currency we issue, not with coins, but every paper currency has its own identity. So essentially, we're prepared for the blockchain now with currency. Should that be how we build this?
So I think of it as, again, what's the problem you're trying to solve? And if the problem you're trying to solve is fast, almost frictionless ability to send money across the country, do it rapidly, send it around the world, be able to send it to your cousins in Argentina. If that's what you're trying to solve, a central bank digital currency does that. And you don't really need a stablecoin for that. You've already got a dollar denominated.
Let me pause Elizabeth right here too. This is not the only problem the people are trying to solve. Sure, a central bank can do that, but they're still not any different. The IMF does exist, Elizabeth, and they still are going to control who and what can transact in that money. And on top of that, like part of that reason,
transaction fees,
transaction fees, which are more so than Bitcoin and these other technologies. And on top of that, we just there's the ability to put sanctions or tariffs on different people's stuff, and who controls that? Most often it's the person that controls. And so that's also a lot of people's point, because what makes for a more fair market, like a more internationally fair market, that just can't. And that's why people oftentimes will consider, they're like, well, if Bitcoin was a country, and this is where they got that type of concept from, that type of notion, is because it is cutting out the bank, and it has no ties to no one country is the reserve country of Bitcoin. Then it's out there, and the people all around the world control it. And so while she's mentioning, well, if the thing that we need to solve is just this transacting of money, why not keep these banks and let them do it and people are like, well, because we don't need them to do it. Point blank period. If they're not needed to do it, and it solves this issue, and then it takes away the ability for you to just sanction in this issue, then it already sounds like a more trustless, which is why that word's always going around, way of banking. It sounds more appealing to more people, and so it's appealing to more people than just you. And I'm an American, so obviously this stuff often benefits me, but at what point does it not benefit me? And if it does stops the benefit us, then what's the solution? Should you not I'm very much of the mind of don't put your eggs in one basket. While I will enact in the dollar, transact in the dollar and stuff like that is our home currency, the digital reserve of the world, I am not against owning gold and having a vault of gold either. I'm not against owning silver coins. I'm not against it. I'm not against using. And if somebody were to accept those silver coins or a fraction of a silver coin for a whole bunch of video games, I would give them a fraction of that dang silver coin for a whole bunch of video games or whatever I wanted to get. To a trip to Vegas, a trip to wherever. I'm going to go to Paris. Here's a shilling. Cool. Let me transact in it. And if I can do it quicker than trying to do it through the bank one day or something like that, and they're like, we can't because you deposited this amount of money this other day or whatever the heck the reasons they want to give, then I'm going to use that other service, and I want to be able to use that other service. So that's something else that she's missing. And it's probably because she's, you're in American politics and stuff, and so you're not even thinking about what would benefit other people other than just straight up an American that is used to this system that if it's down today, it's just down today. You got to deal with it. If we just don't want to give you the money right now, we just don't want to give you did something. And so whatever. It's that don't work for everybody. It just doesn't, it historically has not worked for everybody.
You don't really need a Bitcoin to be able to do that. So then the question becomes, so what is it that the Bitcoin, what problem is it solving for? And now we get into a very different space. Many of those who support Bitcoin say, well, I don't want the government to be the one who manages the currency. I don't want the government to be able to be the transfer medium for sending money to my cousin.
Decentralized financial system.
Well, it's more than decentralized. It's a non-governmental, no ability to penetrate. And this is where the digital world starts to divide. There are those who say, we want to be able to run ours independent of a government, but we want it regulated so people can understand it and trust it. And that means you have to do certain things, like banks do, like know your customers, so you know that you're not doing drug money laundering, right? Or you're not helping out tax cheats, or you're not helping a country like Russia evade financial sanctions. But there's another part of the crypto world that says, no, we like it that nobody can tell who came on the system and what they're using the system for. They would describe it as getting away of the prying eyes of the government. But another way to say that is, opening up the door to the money launderers, to the human traffickers, to the tax cheats, to the countries that are trying to evade sanctions. And so how you want to regulate that world and how you want to build regulation, like I said, depends on what you're trying to accomplish here. I think that world should be largely cut off from the cheats and from the money launderers. But not everyone agrees with that.
Do you think we're at a point where the toothpaste is so out of the tube on Bitcoin as a digital gold, to simplify the conversation here, that whether you accept the premise or not, it's probably going to end up getting regulated at a minimum like a commodity?
So I think it's going to end up getting regulated. But, anytime you talk about the toothpaste being too far out of the tube, I always remember how many people said to me in 2006, 2007, 2008, toothpaste is out of the tube on subprime mortgages and derivatives because billions and billions of dollars were flowing through the system. And then once it blew up the entire economic system, all of a sudden the folks in Congress got religion and said, whoa, on some of this we need to put real regulation in place, and on some of it we just flat need to make it illegal.
Do you think the digital space is so big that it could create a credit default swap-like impact on our economy if suddenly a whole bunch of holders of Bitcoin decided, maybe this is air?
Yeah.
Senator Warren says it's air. Maybe it is, I'm out.
And as soon as enough people start saying, I'm out, look, this has worked. The whole digital world has worked very much like a bubble works. And that is, it keeps going up based on what? Based on additional production? No, based on the fact that it has demonstrated that it solved all these other problems and it is now being used exponentially in areas where it had to be used before. Not really. What has it moved up on? It's moved up on the fact that people all tell each other that it's going to be great. Just, again, like it was on that real estate market. How many times do people say real estate always goes up? It never goes down. They said it decades ago, before the last real estate bubble. They said it in the 2000s, before the crash in 2008.
Real estate and climate change.
There we go. That's all separate thing. That's right. But that is the ultimate risk, because there's no government to back it up. There's no commodity to back it up, whether it's gold or wheat or anything else. There's nothing at the end of the day except confidence that it's going to go up. And if people lose that confidence, then it's gone.
I believe, what is the shorthand for confidence gain? Which is, and I
hadn't thought about that.
I do remind people the word confidence. It's shortened a lot. And
that's right.
That's where con comes in on this.
The con and confidence.
Have you looked at this and said, what if I'm wrong? What if they're right? And how could you be wrong here? I'm trying. And I say this, and I'm not saying you are.
Okay. So.
Okay. Right before she goes into her explanation of this, I do want to say that I feel, we can stop. Like, I want to see if you have anything to say too, Space. But her point of confidence, I don't think she's wrong with the point of confidence. However, I do think it's very contradictory, because, yes, it's a free market, and a free market does revolve around confidence in a product, or confidence. Like, I'm not going to trade you my pelt for your pelt if I think I put your pelt on my shoulder and there's a bunch of mites on it. Like, then I don't have confidence in your pelts. Straight up, free market. Like, there's something that gives me more confidence in the system. The confidence that people have people have to have confidence in the Bitcoin network. And people have the confidence that it's decentralized enough. People have a confidence that it has yet to crash. Like, people have confidence in it for a multitude of different reasons, for its ability to be liquid on certain assets and whatever happens. But people have that confidence on it. And while she's saying that, I'm like, well, what's the confidence that people should just have on the United States dollar and our monetary policy? And so, and again, this is not to be anti-United States or anything like, but this is like, when I'm thinking about investments and stuff like that, I gotta also consider, play devil's advocate and be like, well, what do other countries feel about that? What do other countries' consumer or investors feel about that? Do they have that total, like, we're born in America and we feel like this is a type of American way about things, but like, do they all have that type of confidence in it? When you see like the world economy do this or that, and it's like the Americans seem kind of fine, it seems like it's benefiting them more so than other. Like, what is their confidence level in it? And like when we get this inflation like this and different, like, what is their confidence level in it? Like, I get how it feels to be in America, but I have to play devil's advocate in my mind and be like, well, what is theirs? And I feel like that makes you a better investment or investor if you can consider the outside view as well as your own view. Because if you can't see like how the other player is going to potentially do something, you're not reading them at all. You're not playing chess. Like, you're just waiting and reacting, and that's not the way to go. And I feel like like hers is just contradicting in that sense, where it's like she's going to wait and react. She's got her opinions, and again, I'm like, I don't feel you're wrong with the confidence thing, but I don't feel like you're considering enough other people or whatever have you, and like what their actual opinions on those topics would be, because maybe you'd see some of this then. But and that's a more of a fair market if you're going to leave it as anything that's able to be traded. Like, even if she's totally right, she's like, oh, it's air and this and that. Like, well, if people want to pay for air, then people will pay for air. If people want to pay for water, which was unimaginable years, then people are going to pay for water. Like, people are going to pay for whatever they want to pay for, and they're going to have the confidence behind whatever they want to have a confidence behind. So if people want to transact in air all of a sudden, the same way they've transacted in rice paddies or tobacco leaves or gold or silver, they're going to transact in that commodity or that asset or whatever have you. They're going to transact in that. And they're going to have confidence in that for specific reasons. And so that's my thing with hers. Anything from you, from what she said so far before she breaks down her last portion of things?
Yeah, I'm happy that she's a prominent member of the government that is confident enough to sit down and talk about crypto, to move that needle forward. I do feel as though a lot of people project their fears about the ongoing money laundering and shady bank transactions that are happening with fiat onto crypto, which again that's understandable, and like it's great that she's talking about it and wants to understand it. It's just much more to learn than that.
See, yeah, I would agree. And again, like that's why I'm kind of like she's making points, but at the same time, a lot of those points can be contradicted. It's like if your system that you're currently advocating is that much worse for these things, then is that not contradictory at all? Like like you just don't like this one. That's kind of what it comes down to. And it's like, well,
right.
then you should probably say that, like, I don't like it because of I just don't like it because I'm team this, and that makes sense. But as something that for an investor, from the investor side of things, I'm saying you not liking it don't mean I can't be my team.
Right. And the businesses are already doing what they can to evade taxes. So, I mean, why not try something different?
See.
It's cool, though.
Yeah. And, they also mentioned, like, the side of, like, who's for like I already mentioned before, I'm for the regulation side of things because, like, things need to be regulated to a degree. And you have a public ledger here that's more public than your current banking system. And so if you actually do the research and the work, you should be able to find those things. But you need to stop treating it like it's just as invisible as the United States dollar if somebody buries it under the ground and shoots it through a tunnel. Like, no, it's not. It's not. You can do more. You should try. You should check it out. You should actually jump on this stuff. And, like, somebody telling me, like, how it feels to ride a bike downhill that's never done it. Get out of my face with that. Back into this. Sorry, that weird analogy. But, like, you know what I'm saying? You gotta experience some things in life. But back to Elizabeth Warren on if you buy Bitcoin, are you just buying thin air?
Let's do Russia.
Yeah, okay.
Let's do right now. We know, for example, that Iran and North Korea use cryptocurrencies to evade financial sanctions.
Not a lot, though. It turned out to be, it is a smaller amount, Chunk, than folks thought, we hope.
But they are using them to evade financial sanctions, right? We also know that Russia is involved in about 3/4 of all the ransomware payoffs going on around the country. So in other words, the Russians are very sophisticated on dealing with crypto. They clearly have demonstrated they're willing to engage in the illegal portion of the spectrum, and that countries can use crypto, not totally to substitute for sanctions or totally evade them, but to create a hole in the bucket, right? A little opportunity to move money around. We also know, by the way, that the Bank of Russia has now authorized banks to deal in crypto because they're shut out of the banking system. So we see all of those things. My response is to say, along with several other senators, including the head of the Foreign Relations Committee, the head of the Intelligence Committee, the head of Senate Armed Services, to say, let's give Treasury the tools to say that any of the crypto exchanges that are not following knowing their customers and blocking evasion of sanctions can't do business in the United States. Just give them the tool for that. And the response of the crypto company, some of them, crypto advocates, said we don't need that. You're wrong. It's not a problem. To which my response is, if you are right, then you shouldn't mind that we put some regulations in place. If crypto is really not being used by human traffickers and money launderers and drug traders and tax cheats, you shouldn't mind that these exchanges have to do know your customer and make sure that on the front end and the back end, as the money comes into the crypto exchange and leaves the crypto exchange, that it's not being used in those ways.
Is this a way to just simply, though, we look at that hole in the system, and you can make an argument, we have a hole in the system when we used to be able to print counterfeit money, and we changed our money, and we really created a whole bunch of great ways now. And it's pretty secure. Counterfeiting has, I don't want to say, but counterfeiting is no longer the problem it once was.
That's right.
So in theory, you could fix that hole. Let me ask this. If a Bitcoin exchange puts itself to the US dollar, are you more comfortable than seeing Bitcoin as a commodity out there?
As long as
they
will,
to the US
that's right. And if they will verify the assets, if they want to be a stablecoin, for example, and verify their assets, now the whole world changes from my perspective. Yes, now let's see what you can do. Let's
back
see
against
if you
the
can
US dollar, base it to the US dollar.
And show that you've got the assets. If you want to do that, I'm in. If you want to be entirely speculative, that is not like a stablecoin, but you want it to go up and down.
Like a mic drop. I use the example of a mic drop baseball card.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. Or like the U.S. stock market.
Yep.
You want to go up, you want to go down, you want to have a place where people can come in and speculate. That's fine too. But that's the basic rules in place. So pump and dumps are illegal on the U.S. stock market.
How do you stop a Dogecoin? Dogecoin is like this whole the whole idea, the dog coin, right?
That's right.
Watch it, and it was, to me, it's like, well, they really exposed a big flaw in Bitcoin.
I see it this way. I actually don't think that one exposes a big flaw. It says, guys, this is what you said it is. It is, I made this up and I'm having great fun with it, and people then get engaged and they have confidence in it, so they bid up the value of it. The part I care about is that the exchange, the trade, is straight up and honest. So for example, you can't say to people, come on in, you can come on in, you can trade, and then say, but you know what? If things start to go south, all my friends can cash out first, and you don't get to cash out for 12 more hours. Think about that, right? Because that just means all the people who aren't your friends are the ones who are supporting this and acting as the cushion in the market with their money. Nobody knows how these places operate except to say that.
I had to stop her there. I'm like, how you gonna contradict more? And that's my only thing with her. Like, yes to the regulation and stuff like that and everything that you're saying. You seem to understand some of these things. You don't seem to understand those exact same contradictions that you're talking about that have already been worked out. Because yes, if you go to an actual exchange, which the funny thing about those exchanges that she's mentioning is those are business run. Those are run by businesses. Those are FTX. That's Binance. These are businesses run by people. However, there's also decentralized exchanges where you can move it because it's all being supplied by individuals. It's like doing a peer-to-peer, trade type of situation. That's what it is. There's code down there, and now we can do this. That's what an AMM protocol confirms for us. And at the same time, when she's talking about, well, if I do this borrowing or lending, then I can't move my stuff out of the market. Well, wasn't that the issue with Robinhood, Elizabeth? Didn't a lot of people just experience that? Like, how often do they have to experience it with like actual banks and stuff like that, or these other institutions that work within regulation? That just happens to them, and we know why it's happening to them. Why is it every time the market goes up so much, all of a sudden these people cannot just move their funds as freely? It's already happening. And so, like, again, I feel like she's contradicting a lot when she says some of this stuff. So, like, you and other things, but at the same time, play more devil's advocate and actually try to see the other side of things. Because maybe you would change your opinion. Like, yes, you got some of it right, but not understanding what it's fixing. Like, why are you, like, you just want to play the game of, like, again, to her point, like, and when she finally flipped her script, well, as long as it's to the United States dollar, like, that seems like that's all you care about. You just want to make sure that you have control over it. And as long as you have control over it, as long as you can do the KYC thing and stop somebody and then sure. But you already have these issues within that system. And so since there are already these issues in that system, we need more baskets. Leave the floor to you if you have anything before we get into this last minute or so of this.
Yeah, I'll let it
play
on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Think about that, right? Because that just means all the people who aren't your friends are the ones who are supporting this and acting as the cushion in the market with their money. Nobody knows how these places operate except to say that you keep getting one story after another where somebody tries to cash out and finds out they can't do it for 12 hours, or finds out they put in $100 and it costs $40 to get back out. It's a question of just basic consumer protection. I used to say this: you can't buy a toaster in America that has a 1 in 5 chance of exploding and burning your house down. And I kind of think that ought to be the standard for mortgages. It ought to be the standard for checking accounts, and it ought to be the standard for Bitcoin. They shouldn't be able to burn you down over it. Just basic safety regulations.
All right, and there we have it from Senator Warren, our final video of the day, wrapping up her opinions on Bitcoin. If you buy Bitcoin, are you just buying thin air? All right, any takeaways from you on the topic, Space?
I mean, it's just a lot of FUD based on what people are already doing in the economy. The only difference is that, like, sometimes those people get caught and they go to jail sometimes, but you don't know if it's the actual person that was the mastermind that's going to jail. To me, Bitcoin's going to be what they wanted gold to be, where it will back all these other coins, because as Bitcoin goes up and down, so does the market, depending on what their project is. I don't know.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I feel like also, like, to degree, I feel like crypto and Bitcoin have the answer that the government wants, honestly, to a degree. Like, you want to be able to track these people, like, it becomes that much harder to do money laundering if you actually just create a body of the government that goes out there and is on scanners. You actually just out there watching money move from wallet to, because you can track it from wallet to wallet. How do you think people find, you serious about your crypto investing and stuff like that, or DGEM plays, you're going to go find a whale wallet, see what coins they got, how often they're trading them, what platform are they trading them with, where'd they move them. You can track people like that. So, like, as a government, when you're thinking about, like, she's talking about regulation and stuff like that, it's like, well, it regulates itself to a degree if you want to put in like protocols and services. There's no reason the government wouldn't be able to be like, okay, if this wallet does this movement with this other wallet or whatever the heck have you, then we put a pause on it when it comes into this exchange or whatever, or we have it, whatever. Like, you can do your thing, but like the general market is just kind of going to exist. The same way the general market, like once they put United States dollars out there, they can do their things about, like, if this money comes into, this person comes into the store, or they try to interact with this bank or whatever, then there's a pause on it. But somebody just walking around with a stack in their pocket can always it's nothing. Nothing has ever stopped them, and nothing's gonna stop them from just handing it to the next person, unless like the only answer that's going to is like if they actually digitize it. And once you digitize it, do you just want to have it be a normal digital thing that like could potentially be like shut down, or do you want to put it on a blockchain like something like Bitcoin or whatever that like and I say something like Bitcoin because like I feel like for like the actual dollars situations you're not going to use Bitcoin for that. Again, that's probably like the digital gold. But you want to use some of like this technology that actually makes it public and transparent and obvious to see. The hate around that and the hate around there being a digital gold version of that is kind of like, or it's not even hate, it's just like still a misunderstanding to a degree. But to the point that space was given, Elizabeth Warren, I do think she's moving in the right direction. I know she gets a lot of like flack from the crypto community, but sitting down to the table to have these conversations is, I believe, the first steps of things. All the sharks were like all against cryptocurrency 2 years ago. And they said, Jordan Belfort, the Wolf of Wall Street, was against cryptocurrency 2 years ago. All these people have flipped their minds. And as Jordan Belfort was just recently saying, I shared this in our Discord, is because he sat down and he stopped just hating on it because, is this new audacious thing that blah, 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 blah. And he started to learn about it. And he's like, well, this is like fixing some of this. It's fixing a lot of these things. And the rest of the crypto market is like fixing a lot of these issues that we currently have. I'm down for it. Everything is not going to be the answer. You shouldn't be in it just to like make that quick flip or whatever. But there's some products out here and some things that are actually what we wanted. So that's that. This is our last video that we watched before we jump into the Bitcoin standard part of this series, the fundamentals and concepts of crypto and investing 101. So thank you for joining us. I do want to give the floor to Space Returns again. If there's anything else that you wanted to mention about like all the topics that we covered today, from the Weimar Republic to quantitative easing to quantitative tightening, to this last talk with Elizabeth Warren on NBC.
Compound, man, because the market will kick your ass if you don't. Compound daily.
See. Yeah, compounding is important. And for those that don't know, compounding is taking your earnings and reinvesting those earnings, and then, or that yield that you got and reinvesting it. And so, it's an important thing. And like, that's also similar to, we talked about quantitative easing and tightening today. And I think you could also kind of incorporate the idea of compounding within that, which is that the issue with quantitative easing came from when you have something that's no longer producing a yield really, but all the money's going toward it. And so if you just had, and that's kind of, I'm just bringing this up as a concept of like, if you have something that's, number one, don't buy assets that aren't producing a yield. But if there's something that's producing a yield, don't just sit on that yield, produce something with it. You got that ability, produce something with that yield, compound with that yield. Don't just let that yield sit there, and you would do better. Because when people just sit on that, then we start to have this issue. So that's my outro. Thank you guys for tuning in. Again, we're getting into the Bitcoin standard next. I think I might have one more video that we're just going to do the individual video of it before we jump into Bitcoin standard, just because I think it's a really interesting tie-in along kind of like with this Elizabeth Warren thing. But there's a video from Anthony Pompliano's The Best Business Show that I want to cover before we go in there. So we'll watch that individual segment of that video, and then we'll jump into the Bitcoin standard for the rest of our series. Again, thank you guys for joining us. It's been your boy MMG Smurf and my guest Space Returns. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in the next one. Deuce.